Well, welcome back, everybody, to season two. We're grateful that you listened to season one. We had an amazing season. We had conversations with Mary Galloway from Women's Cyber Jiu-Jitsu, with Ladies of Black and Cyber. We had a few other people that were actually some great guests. We had some good stories and just had a good time. Season one was a good growth and growing pain for us to learn what we were doing. And thank you for sticking with us. We plan to make season two a lot better, a lot stronger with more guests and more new stories and potentially tools and tips and advice. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to share more with you.
Yeah, definitely more tools. tools.
Sure.
I think that's one of the big drivers for this season, like showcase some of the tools. Also, another guest that unfortunately is leaving the Boston area, Winona Sombambre. She's going to kill me. I mispronounced her last name. But she's one of the threat intel analysts at Recorded Future. She was one of the guests. She's also a fellow Bostonian for another couple of weeks. She actually just took a job over at Google to walk into a threat research unit there. So definitely congrats to Winona on that. Unfortunately, she's leaving Boston. Heading over to California to work at Google. But she's in like a pretty she's pretty pumped about her role, and I'm definitely proud of her for getting that job. Like that's going to be sick. She's going to do like some awesome work there.
That's real good, man. Progression is always good, especially in this field.
So bye, Winona.
When is her last day in Boston?
She's having a going away party. I hope I'm not giving out too much info. She's having a go. It's like she lives at this exact address. No, she's having a going away party in like 2 weeks, and then she's gone like December. So she'll be out, and then she'll be starting in Cali.
Okay.
Yeah, so that kind of sucks, but she's on to bigger and better things. So definitely congrats on that.
Yeah, progression is always good.
Yeah, definitely pumped for the guests this season. We're going a little international this year, so a few individuals from different parts of the globe.
That's pretty cool. Very, very excited about that too. So kudos for you for making it happen, man. Appreciate it.
Gotta do this together, man. Takes a team. Takes a team.
It does, definitely. I ran across a story that's pretty interesting and kind of dear to my heart. National Guard is actually helping out with ransomware. I was in the National Guard for about 10 and a half years. I did half in the Army, half in the Air National Guard. Latter of that being in the Army doing IT and cybersecurity work. But with the recent outbreaks of ransomware, running rampant in the States, it's kind of becoming like a state mission now for the National Guard to help out. There's a pilot program, I believe, in Ohio, Texas, and Louisiana. The National Guard is basically helping out smaller businesses and individuals that need help and assistance with ransomware. They're actually sending out their task force to help out. Currently, these teams are kind of small. So even when I was in the National Guard, our cybersecurity team was roughly about 6 people, ranging from officers and enlisted folk. But in this case, they're actually tasked to handle the ransomware. And so far, I think they were helping out Texas and Louisiana, who actually were affected. Some of the companies, state and local governments were kind of affected. And they didn't pay out anything, so that was a good thing. And, this probably could be something that's going to be shifted to all 50 states. Governor mandated, to call up the National Guard, because typically the National Guard has 2 missions, right? So they have the federal mission, which is directed by the, federal offices, president, and then the state and local mission, which is directed by pretty much the governor of each state. So that's pretty exciting to have, cybersecurity as a task, because when I was in, actually, what the task that I did was, I had to do hurricane duty when hurricanes came through in Florida. So I think having an additional tasking of like being in IT and having cybersecurity work to do is actually really cool. Like I said, the team sizes range from 8 to 10 people, and that's something that's on the horizon, really. So it's pretty exciting to hear about that opportunity in the National Guard, because I know when I was then, cybersecurity was kind of ramping up a little bit. It was more so more mandated by the National Guard Bureau up in D.C., but now it's actually trickling down to each state to actually have their own, different cybersecurity departments to handle cybersecurity issues such as ransomware. So really cool.
Yeah, that actually shows you like the difference in like, not the difference, but like the shift essentially of how cybercrime is being handled, right? Like if you look at like a unit like, or an organization like the FBI, like at one point the FBI had their cybercrimes division, and they were primarily responsible for investigating hacks that occur within the United States to like different businesses and different high serving vectors. So like if you're a top 10 paint manufacturer or semiconductor manufacturer or I don't know, tire manufacturer, you were likely like the threat of like international, like APT style targets, right? And then now what you've seen is I guess after the FBI had so many requests for help for ransomware the last like 3 or 4 years, like when they originally put out that statement that stated, hey, don't pay ransomware. And then they reneged on that and said, okay, we'll actually pay it because everyone started to ping them like, hey, like all these businesses were hitting them up like, hey, we need help. We're like under attack, and who do we turn to? We can't turn to the city, like the local police, to help us out. They're not equipped for that. I mean, maybe you can turn to the state, but most businesses around 2013 and 2015 were turning to the FBI.
Yeah.
And then they changed that statement again. It basically changed the statement again to, hey, well, actually don't pay them, but now you're kind of on your own, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things you kind of see with the shift, at least from like just people I've known like in the FBI and kind of just like speaking around to, like other people, because I tend to, I don't know, maybe I'm adventurous with conversations, so I tend to like try to know people in different backgrounds. So you never know when you're going to need help, like especially if you're working at a business that works in like the financial arena. Like it makes sense to know like the local FBI field office individuals within the cyber crimes, because you never know you're going to need their help. That's the way I look at it. But one of the things you've seen is really like the FBI, the cybercrime is now focused particularly on nation state and APT style attacks, and then financial crimes, because financial crimes and cyber crimes are essentially the biggest makeup of crime within that the FBI handles, right? Like most of the crime they're handling is something related to cyber nowadays. Of course, there's still terrorism and those other aspects, but the huge majority of it is like cyber related lately.
Yeah.
And most of the crime that occurs in the U.S., like it's like 60% or something like that, is actually like online. I could be wrong with that stat, but I think it's like 60-some%. The majority of the crime is like actual like online crime nowadays.
Oh yeah, it's so much easier to do now, and so many tools you can use from the dark net, and all kinds of stuff you can do. So
yeah, it's not that hard to start like your own thing. I mean, as long as you're crafty with like not getting caught. I mean, I'm not advocating anyone does that, but I mean, it's like it's fairly simple. Like it's not that hard to find. It's not like you don't need to create the malware or ransomware. If you're willing to pay, a specific group to operationalize it for you, or customize, different aspects of malware for you, and then you find another group that you can buy, stolen accounts to. I mean, boom, you have an operation right there. It's like part A is find the accounts, but you can buy those. That's buckets gone. Part B is find the malware, find the software you're going to leverage, and there's plenty of people selling that. And then the next part is really just, okay, well, now I'm off to the races.
Exactly. And I wonder how fast is actually going to be deployed to other states, basically, because I know Florida, we talked about this on one of our podcasts before, they had about 3 different attacks here in Florida. One of the ones being most recent in Lake City, which is about 60 miles from me. And then also in Georgia last year, you had the ransomware that attacked the city, where other systems were down for a while and they were doing things manually. So it's definitely catching fire, and hopefully it does get deployed to all 50 states to have like a cyber task unit to help out local and state governments. That'd be really cool.
You're starting to see more municipalities like pick this up. Like I was at a conference like 4 weeks ago, maybe, at the Pell Center in Rhode Island. It's a policy think tank, right. But there were representatives from the Rhode Island Joint Cyber Task Force, which I believe is under the state police They run that. But there was multiple conversations around, okay, from a municipality perspective, what are we doing to protect ourselves? Because about 2 months ago, there's a city called New Bedford that's outside of Boston, maybe like 40, 50 miles outside of Boston, and they fell victim to like a ransomware attack, but they didn't pay. Like they just, they basically said, screw it, we'll figure it out on our own. Their systems went down for a bit, but luckily they had backups in place. It's almost as if they relied upon their DR plan or incident response plan. I can't remember which one they specifically referenced in the press release, but they fought it off themselves. They're like, we're not going to pay, we'll fight it ourselves. And I think that's the approach. I believe that is a better approach for most municipalities, right? Like it's obvious they're smaller targets, or they're targets because of their size, and criminals are expecting them not to put up much of a fight due to like light staff or limited resources they may have. So you're starting to see these actors just target, like you said, it's happened in Florida, it's happened in Atlanta, it's happened in Baltimore, it's happened in Boston now. It's like it just keeps happening like every month. Like you hear a different story about it. But when you're starting, I think the trend over the last year is more companies or more municipalities are just saying, we're not going to pay. Like we'll fight back on this.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a good approach to take, because even if you do pay, you're not really sure if you're going to get the data back or not. So rather than pay something out, you want to try to fix as much as possible. Have a third party help you, or in this case, National Guard or FBI. So.
Yeah, totally agree. I don't think we actually mentioned that we had an awesome guest later, but we totally skipped over that.
We're excited, man.
Yes, first actual international guest today, someone that I got to know over the last 2 years. So definitely excited to hear a bit from him.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
One of the things I was looking at earlier, actually the last 2 weeks, just based on what I've been working on with my primary, with my day job outside of my company, in regards essentially operationalizing application security. I'm not sure if you saw this. It was essentially what some of the researchers from a company called Aquasec or Aqua. They focus on cloud security and serverless security, so mostly container security. So if you're running ECS or EC2 nodes, things like that within AWS, this is where they kind of kick in, and they allow you to run baselines and really obtain system system analysis, what you would traditionally run with IDS or SIM or some type of HID solution on within your environment. Now you have the ability to run this inside of a container in AWS. It's cool stuff because it's there's not that many companies that actually do this. So they're it's like Aquasec and Twistlock. What's another one that does it, that focuses in cloud? I think Palo Alto actually bought Twistlock. Never mind. I was going to say Palo Alto, but they bought Twistlock. There's one or two other companies that I've kind of heard of that are focusing specifically on container security. But what some of the researchers actually found was essentially there was a group of actors that were maneuvering Docker API takeovers. So essentially, if you don't work with Docker, I'll kind of simplify this, but you leverage Docker to build out images that are stable just across your environment or across a particular build that you can rapidly deploy from within a cloud environment, or just on a local system in and of itself. I run Docker for a lot of VMs. I just pull the image down and it spins up the VM for me, and it has most of the files I need already there because I write it into Docker and kind of deploy it with Ansible. But what they were able to discover that was one of the a new attack vector where someone's actually targeting Docker run on top of unsecured API sockets. So instead of actually running a malicious Docker image, what they're able to do is actually point to a host machine via an unsecured Docker socket, and then once they're able to attach that Docker socket, they're able to upload a different type of images that may benefit them. So they can find the entry point and upload, a script really that can deploy a file system, and then from that file system they can essentially write themselves as root inside of your container, right? So write themselves as root or deliver a payload, and this is essentially them running around authentication, which is the first one I've actually heard of where a group of individuals are successfully kind of sneaking around. Let's say you have AppArmor or SE Linux running on your container. They're yeah, that's not going to work. We can just disable it. Because once we actually run the script on your container, we can disable any type of security mechanisms or countermeasures you may have in place, and then they can just take it over. And then it's I guess you got to rebuild a whole new Docker instance at that point. So that's the first I've heard of that in the last 4 or 5 months. And it's interesting to see how the attack vector is totally shifting, because I remember years ago when I was speaking with some of our sysadmins before everyone was calling them DevOps. They're all right, well, listen, we're going to use Ansible, or we're going to use not Packer. What was the other big one for system deployments, rapid system deployments? It was oh my gosh, I can't think of it right now. It wasn't for AWS, but we were basically they were all using all these rapid system deployment tools for automated deployments, and it was all right, well, it's impossible to attack this because we can just rebuild it on the fly. But now you see attackers well, you can rebuild it, but if you don't catch us once we actually attack that specific build, it's ours until we're booted out. And it's just a weird place to be in now, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Were you thinking about Terraform, Chef Puppet?
Puppet. It was Puppet. That's what I was thinking of. It was Puppet. Yeah, because I remember having these conversations with a couple of our sysadmins. This was a company I was with, and I was living in New York maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago. But I was hey, how often are we actually? What happens if we need to update a patch, emergency patch, or what happens if there's some type of kernel vulnerability? Like, how are you guys actually handling this? They're like, it doesn't really matter because, all we have to do is create a new instance. Create a new image, place that in a Docker, and then we push it out across the environment. But that's dependent on you actually understanding that there is a vulnerability or there is an exploit available. So if someone's is flying under the radar and there's no CVSS, like a vulnerability score attributed to it, or there's no news about this, you're kind of in the dark. So you're just assuming everything's normal. And then in actuality, someone's taken over possibly your Docker deployment and possibly gotten access to like some type of container you're running inside of a cloud environment.
Wow, yeah, container security is something I have to actually research. I never really got into it or use it fairly often. When did you actually first get into container security?
It wasn't until I joined this new role. Like I joined them about 3 months ago, okay. And really the challenge there was, most of my background is on the blue teaming side, so that's intrusion analysis or incident response, a bit of threat hunting and like intelligence, like building those out for clients or building that out for an organization, and then helping staff that or run it myself. But this was just like a different. It was just like a different world, really, because when you think about like those 3 traditional pillars of security from like a monitoring, detection, and response side, it's like, okay, how do you apply that to like a cloud environment, right? Like, and then that's where I didn't have an answer for it, so that was kind of exciting for me. It was like, all right, well, maybe this is like a whole new challenge. And when I started to ask around, like for different people that I know that are in the field, there just weren't that many people that were doing this, so I figured, why not tackle it?
That's cool. Always good to learn something like we mentioned Sunday during our conversations. Always good to kind of keep your skills moving forward and not get stagnant on what you're doing, because it makes you more valuable when you can actually, say that you touch certain different applications and aspects of security.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's how, I guess we can get into that with the interview, but I was going to say that's how you keep growing, right? Like you have to push yourself to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Another story that got my attention was BlueKeep is actually kind of in the wild now, and it's kind of funny because it's like it's trucking along slowly. Like the threat actors are trying to use BlueKeep in a malicious way, but right now I see it as a phase basically. But they're using it for installing coin miners. Basically, just to recap, BlueKeep is a nickname given to CVE 2019-078, which is a vulnerability in the Microsoft RDP remote desktop protocol service. And interestingly enough, I found out today that BlueKeep is actually a term coined by Kevin Beaumont. It's a play on words for, I guess, something in Game of Thrones called the Red Keep. I've never really watched Game of Thrones. I know, shame me. But
it's like I have a life.
Something called the Red Keep within Game of Thrones. I thought that's pretty interesting. That's where the name came from. So currently, BlueKeep only impacts Windows 7, Windows Server 2008 R2, and Windows Server 2008. Patches have been available since mid-May, but a lot of organizations are still patchless, if you will, against this. There's a large number I get into a little bit later. On the same day the patch was released, Microsoft released a blog saying this possibly could be a wormable vulnerability. And so far, the wormable portion hasn't been exploited yet. Just right now, it's kind of in the wild. There's a security researcher, Kevin Beaumont, who I mentioned earlier. He had a honeypot going back in October for a while. He kind of forgot about it, but once he went back to his honeypot, he saw that these attacks were basically failing. I think he said like 10 out of 11 were failing, and what they were doing was actually drumming up a blue screen due to faulty code. So it's like that threat actors are actually out there trying to exploit this, and the researchers are kind of like on top of it, kind of noticing what they're doing with this attack, basically. So like I said, right now it's just doing coin mining, which isn't a terrible threat. It still can definitely use the resources on your PC, like your CPU, and also within your browser, the memory as well. So still something to look out for. It's still something to protect against. Actually, back in September, some of the developers of Metasploit penetration testing framework published the first public BlueKeep proof of concept exploit. And whenever that happens, there's threat actors that get out there and try to use it as well. So according to research done with Shodan and Binary Edge, like I was mentioning earlier, there are roughly about 750,000 internet-connected Windows systems that are vulnerable to BlueKeep and have not patched yet. So if you're listening to this, patch your stuff.
It was just Patch Tuesday. It's just literally just passed.
Yeah, exactly. So, do all possible patches against this. And actually, malware tech, I forget his name, but he's actually one of the lead security researchers on this too. And again, the hacker group basically is using this to exploit, to do coin mining basically. And let's see. Yeah, I mentioned that Kevin Beaumont found the logs in October, and he reported it to ZDNet, and they kind of had a conversation about it. And basically, Microsoft actually was afraid that it was going to turn into something as large as WannaCry, the WannaCry 2.0, but it hasn't got to that point yet. Hopefully it doesn't, because there'd be a lot of machines that are really affected by this. So, again, Microsoft thought it was going to rise to the level of Eternal Blue, WannaCry, NotPetya, and Bad Rabbit, which were ransomware outbreaks back in 2017. So, and
it never ends.
It doesn't. It never ends, man. So, but yeah, just based on his research, what they're gathering is that the person or the threat actor group that's actually trying to run these exploits are, slightly above script kiddie level, basically, with this approach, because a lot of these attacks are turning to blue screens. It's like they're trying to figure it out on the fly. Hopefully, it doesn't get bad to where it's actually wormable and more effective. But we'll see in the future what happens with it. And some of the ways to actually fight against this, if your organization, make sure you apply Windows updates, like O'Shea just mentioned, patch Tuesday just passed, and make sure you stay up to date with any relevant BlueKeep patches. Move the RDP listener behind some of the two-factor authentication methods like VPN, SSL, or RDP gateway, and enable NLA, which is network level authentication. So, with that being said, I'm sure that this exploit will be, harped upon and used to actually try to get more in depth with what it can do, maybe potentially becoming wormable. So that's why they advise patching since May. They've been harping this in blogs and interviews and videos to have all organizations patch against this this vulnerability.
Nice. So I think we did mention that we had a special guest. I'm actually kind of excited about this.
Yeah, me too, man.
Yeah, we can kick that off. So here, let's hear from Gus, see what he's up to.
All right, everyone. So, as we mentioned, we do have an awesome guest, a very special guest today, with Mr. Gus Clarke. I'll give him a chance to introduce himself, let us learn a bit about him. So, Gus, how you doing today, man?
I'm very well, thank you.
I hear a bit of an accent. Where are you located?
Currently in Johannesburg in South Africa.
And I guess a disclaimer, I actually know Gus from, over the last year and a half, I went to Johannesburg to a conference called IT Web Security Summit, and I met Gus there. So I guess a disclaimer, I actually do know him. So it almost feels fake to ask, like, hey, what's your name? But
it was a bit of a funny story because we were both actually doing a talk at the same conference and both looking for a quiet space to prepare before our talks. And we ended up in the same room. And I guess that's how we met. And the rest is it.
It's like ridiculously loud there. Like, even when I gave the talk this year, the room I was in, I mean, it was great to be there. Like big shout out to IT Web Summit. Like, it was really great to be invited and to be there. But at one point when I was preparing, I was like, there's no quiet place. Like, you can't mentally put yourself in a zone or in a place to prepare.
Right, so it is the premier security event for Africa. So it's pretty much the most well attended out of all the conferences that happen around cybersecurity in the continent. So it will be difficult to find a quiet space. It is a buzz and a hive of activity, and it's an excellent networking event.
When does it normally take place?
It usually happens around May every single year.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll go back this year. Like, I really enjoyed South Africa, and it's great to meet fellow security practitioners and kind of meet the hacker community there. There's so much talent there, and it's such a smaller community, so it seems like everyone kind of knows each other. Or does that sound about right, Gus?
It sounds exactly right, and I think you can almost preach to this as well. Is that as you get to know people internationally as well, the world gets a lot smaller. You tend to sort of bump into one another in international events as well. So the cybersecurity community is really small, and that's because there's literally just a handful of us around the world. In comparison to other industry specialists.
Yeah, most definitely. I know a couple of people in the UK now and a few in Paris, but it's actually odd, especially when you're in different chat rooms or whatever. You can kind of tell when someone else is starting their day because my phone starts going off at 6 p.m. or something like that, or like 5 a.m. I'm like, all right, something must be going on in this region of the world. It's like I'm in this specific room, and like there's all this chatter happening.
Yeah.
So if you're spending most of your days right now concentrating on like IoT, right?
Actually, the IoT is pretty much a bit of a side hustle, and the reason being is that I think, previously in my career, I've had to deal on the consulting side through PricewaterhouseCoopers, dealing with larger companies that are still doing the basics when it comes to cybersecurity. So they're still trying to implement frameworks. They're still trying to do, tick the check boxes when it comes to CAS controls. But these days, along my journey, I tend to pick sort of companies that are a little more advanced when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, the latest one that I'm dealing with or working with, atTari Labs, we've implemented Zero Trust Network, which doesn't leave a lot of room to focus on other stuff, So the sort of natural progression from there was to focus on my biggest bugbear, which is IoT security. So it started off as a bit of as a sort of side hustle in terms of research. So I've just did a talk now recently at a conference called HexCon around kids' GPS watches and smartwatches, which are using a particular chipset all around the world. And it turns out that these chips are pretty much can be manipulated in many different ways. One, it's not the chipset, but the firmware itself. So I think a large focus of my time these days is around IoT security. I think it is a major bugbear for a lot of companies as well, and it's definitely the way I think the cybersecurity industry needs to focus on if it needs to stay ahead of things in the future.
What was the con again? Because I know you mentioned this in the Slack channel we're in. What's it called again?
Right, it's called HexCon, which is kind of a side project of Hex Coffee, which is a meetup that happens in South Africa, in a couple of cities in South Africa, of like-minded security professionals, and it's generally a technical conference, and it's a free conference. So it just started out as an idea so for people who couldn't afford to go to the mainstream technical conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON or CCC, for example, and to bring it back to South Africa and to share either the knowledge or the security research, and also to give a platform for new and upcoming cybersecurity professionals, to show their hand in what they're doing in the space.
Nice. Yeah. There's a question I know Doug, I was going to let Doug ask the next question, but which he will. But there's one thing I was always curious about. How does that work when you're like in that region of the world, but a lot of the bigger conferences are like on the Western side, right? Like even like you mentioned, like the DEF CON and like the Black Hat. So does it drive the need to have something in your own backyard?
Absolutely. I mean, South Africa is not known for its wealth or its economy. We generally are a bit of a powerhouse in the rest of Africa, but a lot of the professionals that are working in the environment here do not have companies that can afford or even want to pay for their employees to go over and learn about, or at least network with other companies. Usually the bigger companies such as banks or mining companies, etc., that can afford to send their employees or cybersecurity professionals over to these conferences. So the idea was just to bring that knowledge back and to offload it into not just the people who already have jobs in the space, but people who want to work in the space, and just to share that knowledge.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think IoT is a very good concentration. Like, I haven't met too many people in cybersecurity with the IoT. Do you ever use Shodan to kind of like conduct your research on what's out there IoT-wise?
Oh, 100%. I mean, a while back, I was involved in the vulnerability management program for a huge telco. I won't name names, obviously, but they've been seriously affected by a DDoS attack that we managed to knuckle down to the Mirai botnet, in fact, and devices that have been affected by the TR69 protocol. And I was very much involved in that, and Shodan was the tool of choice, and it helped us sort of identify where these devices were sitting. So it's a huge benefit as a tool.
Awesome. So everybody, we just kind of, gave a little backstory, and Gus gave us a backstory about what he does. So we're going to figure out a little more about Gus. What do you do, and can you give us a brief summary of your career?
So I've pretty much been in cybersecurity my whole career. I started out, I got pulled in directly from school to a government institution or agency called the Special Investigations Unit. I'm not going to go into detail about what I did there, but I was there for 3 years. And then from there, I pretty much went straight into government work and worked for government for 8 years, heading up security for a province or a state, as you would call it in America. and then on post that, I got headhunted by PricewaterhouseCoopers and moved up pretty quickly in the space there. I think mainly because of my proficiency in the technical space, and until I eventually got to director level, and I was heading up red teaming and security research, and also was responsible for developing some of the products, their go-to-market products, which was sort of, I think, sort of groundbreaking in terms of what they were offering prior to that to industry. Directly after that, I got a great opportunity to go and build a bank, and not just any bank, a full-service digital bank. And the great thing about it is that we were backed by one of the largest banks in the world, which was Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I had a decent budget for implementing cybersecurity and cybersecurity controls, and it was great fun and a great learning experience. And then post that, once the bank had been finished, it was quite a stressful time. I took some months off, and then got offered another great opportunity to build a new blockchain protocol. And to, I tend to sort of move. I like building things, as you can hear, sort of throughout my career. Yeah. And not only that, but I mean, I like to do things that stretch my capability. I like to do things that I've not done before, and I think that's kind of like, as a cybersecurity professional, you've got to keep learning, you've got to keep moving to keep on your toes. You can't just stay static all the time. And I like being put into uncomfortable situations, and one of them was now moving into the blockchain space.
Cool. That's pretty cool that you found your constant of wanting to build things throughout your career and probably throughout your life as well, that you had a good time building things and now you're actually applying it to your cybersecurity career. That's really cool to hear.
Right, and it's not just building things; it's also taking them apart and breaking them. That's one of the things I think that drives me constantly. I mean, I absolutely love what I do. I wake up every morning and go to sleep every night, loving my job and loving what I do. It's I wouldn't want to do anything else in the world.
That's awesome. Good to hear.
And you made a good point around like testing yourself and becoming uncomfortable. Like that's something when people ask, I don't get this question every day, but there's times I get these questions from individuals that are looking to enter the field, or some like younger individuals. And I recently began mentoring someone that graduated from college fairly soon with a focus in cybersecurity. But one of the things I've always advocated for is like ensure that you have the ability to learn different areas of security. Like there's so many different facets to security, from offensive to defensive, like operations or capabilities. So if you're in a job, whatever job you may be in, it's not my role to tell you what type of job you should do, but ensure that that job offers some type of lane where you can learn different areas. Because once you become static, like it's hard to come out of that bubble. Like I've met people that kind of found themselves in this very comfortable place, and then you fast forward 8 years and they've still been doing network security, and like, which is nothing against that, but when it comes like adding different skill sets or adding different knowledge bits, they've kind of just ignored that because they fell in this area of just like comfortability. Like I have a job, it pays me well, I get to do, no one really bothers me, like that type of thing. And it's like, if you're not being challenged, like it's ridiculously hard to grow and become like a better security practitioner. Like you have to keep sharpening your skill.
So, I mean, you've got to absolutely love cybersecurity to be in cybersecurity. I get asked this question a lot. People who want to jump into the space, and they say, well, where do I start? And nobody wants to do the unsexy stuff. Everybody wants to jump into red teaming, into penetration testing, without going to the basics and understanding. And it's taken me 20 years of offensive security to be able to understand defensive security. I mean, that's how long it takes. And yet, new sort of incumbents to the industry want to jump straight into the hardcore stuff, and they don't want to do the long hard haul of understanding the basics. Unfortunately,
I can rant about this all day. I think you've heard me rant about this. I think a lot of it is like we were in this space now where the knowledge is accessible just via like the internet, right? But it's also like there's so many different tools out there, and I think some people are kind of mesmerized by different tools. Like I can't even count how many times I've heard people speak about like hacking because they have like Kali. I'm like, it's just a Linux distro with a set of tools. Like that's not hacking. Like if it depends on how you're actually leveraging the tool. And I think a lot of people are kind of in this space of like, okay, I can use this tool, so this must make me this. I'm like, well, it takes a while to learn most of the basics. Like I started out in networking, and that was like the whole. That's basically what I did when I was a teenager. I was just obsessed with like the network. But I just turned 36, so yeah, it took me a while to like learn to get to where I am, and I've only done defensive side of cyber. Like I guess I never really wanted to go in like the red teaming I kind of felt like if you can catch someone inside of an environment, it's like fun. Like it's a thrill for me to find people inside of like the environment. So maybe it's like reverse of what most people think about when they're trying to pop a boss. But I think like if I can find you in there and kick you out, like that's like exciting to me. It's like, oh, y'all hard work gone. Now you're out.
Yeah, and I even think the defensive side is like Gus said, it's like probably the unsexy part of cybersecurity, because you're looking for things rather than attacking a network, right? So a lot of people kind of shy away from that and want to get into the red teaming and pen testing and things like that, but not understanding that defense is pretty fun. Being a blue team member is very fun, very challenging, and also to go back to Gus's point about being kind of stuck in this one place. Like that's one thing that I pride myself on as well, is that I'm always trying to learn different aspects of security, so that way I'm not this guy that's making a nice salary in this one position for 20 years basically. Like I want to learn as much as I can and actually share that knowledge with other people to show them how I actually got into cybersecurity.
Heck yeah, man.
And I mean, when it comes to, just to hop back on Shay's point, is that when doing red teaming, you just need to find one way to get in. Blue teaming, you've got to find 1,000 different ways to prevent one way to get in. And I mean, that just makes it so much harder. And that's why I don't have that brain for blue teaming, because obviously I went the easy route and went the red teaming route, which is why I feel I'm almost comfortable enough to do blue teaming now after 20 years of offensive security.
You mentioned you moving into your first role and working with the government, but what was it that kind of sparked that, I guess, kind of lit that flame under you that you knew you were going to move into cyber? Like, how did you officially get started? Was it something that you were into as a kid, or everyone has their backstory?
Right. So the nasty backstory is that I started out, how I got into cybersecurity right from the start is that I had some experience on computers, because I started early. I was able to read and write from the age of 3, and then I got given a computer by the age of 4. So by the time I was 6, I could write in BASIC. So I had some background in computers, but I got into trouble at school with library fines. And long story short, I figured out a way through the computer lab that it was connected to the library system, and I was able to reverse or remove my library fines. And then post that, I kind of removed other people's library fines and made some money from it. So that was that kind of interested me that I could do stuff with computers. And then by the time I was 17 years old, I had hacked a lot of ISPs, and I had a friend that stayed over at my house the one night, and the one day, the largest ISP that we had in our sort of area, I had managed to download all of the credentials onto a stiffy disk or hard disk, and I woke up the next morning and he had taken this disk and he had taken it to this ISP, gotten to them somehow, and convinced them that if he had handed over this disk and traded me in, that they would give him free internet. So he sold me down the river. And what happened is that they actually called me in, and I sat down with the CEO of this company, and the disk was sitting there on his desk, and he said, so he asked me who I was, and I knew straight away I was in trouble, because I knew the disk was mine. And the conversation ended up saying, we could pay you to help us with our security, and we can have some sort of a symbiotic relationship here. It turns out they didn't give that guy free internet, and they gave me free internet, and I ended up working for them. And I got a bit of notoriety from that, and eventually the government found out about it, and they said they could use somebody with my skill, and that's how I got involved.
That's awesome.
That's super cool. It's like you had superpowers, but you needed to know how to control them, basically. That's real cool.
It's always funny when you do at a young, I remember not ISP. I wasn't hacking ISPs at a young age. You do stupid stuff, and then it's like that moment clicks of hey, you can actually make money from this. Like, I didn't know you could actually get paid for this until I was maybe, I don't know, 17 or 18. Because I didn't know that many people that had actual careers in cyber. I just didn't know that many people. I went to our local 2600 meetup in Dallas, and I started to meet people that were oh, by the way, you can actually get a job at AT&T or wherever else. And I was like, oh, wait, you can actually get paid? I was I just assumed I was going to have to give this up and go do something else.
And I mean, for where I was, there was nobody. First of all, everybody who had a computer uses to play games. Nobody was interested in doing anything else. I mean, we were all dialing up with 28.8p modems at that point in time, and the only thing I was interested in was connecting to other devices. I mean, one of the things I used to do was used to war dial toll-free numbers and look for carriers, which were what we call Shiva Land Rovers, which would come back with a carrier, and then you could brute force the username and password, and then from that device, which was connected to a whole bunch of modems, then dial out from that, and in a sense you would get free internet, because phone lines and paying for phone calls which connected you to the internet was very expensive in those days. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's a strange sort of dichotomy, is that I could have gone either way. I could have become a criminal if I had not been caught, actually. So he actually did me a huge favor in outing me, because I mean, if I had continued down that path, I probably would have ended up doing something nefarious.
Yeah, we don't need that. You're in a better position.
I agree.
It is odd though, like, because I worked for the government at one point too, and I always, like, once I became kind of aware of like how the criminal underground works, like that could be a whole other episode, like the economy behind that drives malware purchases or hacker for hire or just like these cyber mercenaries, like that's like a whole nother conversation. But the one thing I did realize is like you can actually make a good living if you're on the criminal side, because if you're in a country that doesn't extradite, vis-a-vis, like a Russia or something like that, or China or North Korea, it's like there's really no one to like rein you in. I mean, I'd imagine their secret services gets involved. If you start attacking the country's infrastructure, like most of the stories I've read or heard in regards to like a lot of the actors in Russia, like the government gives them kind of leeway to work as long as you don't attack anything in the country. Like if you're attacking the U.S., they're like, yeah, go for it. Like, like hack that bank, who cares? But and I'm pretty sure they're making a good living at this. I mean, obviously they're criminals and they're in the wrong, but it's like, who's going to stop them? Like they don't have that many opportunities to work, and here's an easy chance to kind of just like poke around with someone's network because of XYZ vulnerability that they've located. So yeah, like it's like a weird ecosystem, because like the same way we get up and go to work, there's the same thing with them. They're waking up, and they're logging in and they're putting in 8 to 10 hours trying to get into your environment,
Right. And I mean, you've got to consider the psychosocial aspect of it. I mean, a lot of these kids in Brazil, Ukraine, and even in Africa, there's not a lot of big companies around that would employ somebody, even use somebody like that. So you could be a kid somewhere far away from a big city, but you've got access to the internet, and a bit of boredom, and it's a recipe for disaster. They always said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, everybody starts out thinking they can do cool stuff and then realize I can make money doing this. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to get a real job. I've got no way out of this crappy hole or town that I live in. So this may be a financial out for me.
And then you're on the other side.
Yeah. We're glad. So you mentioned earlier that you were young when you actually got into computers and things of that nature. What role did your parents play on you getting your first computer?
My dad brought home a Commodore 64. I was 4 years old at the time. And I actually remember the day vividly because I wasn't allowed to touch it or go near it. I had 2 older brothers, and nobody really knew what they were doing on it. It was just big and shiny and cool at the time. It was kind of like an impulse buy thing on my dad's part. And yet my dad didn't really do much on it. I mean, I don't think he had any idea of, the strange thing is that up until the day that he died, he really had no idea how to use a computer. So I think about it, it's like, why did you buy it in the first place? But that computer primarily got used for playing games, but I actually wanted to do more with it. So I ended up writing little programs that would make little rockets go up and little men move across and that kind of stuff. And that kind of kickstarted me into computers. It was a long lull period after that. In fact, until I was 21 when I got my first computer after that Commodore 64.
Nice. Yeah, I got my first computer as a family in '99 and got my own first personal computer in 2005. So I got into technology a little late, but I'm doing pretty good. So
yeah,
I was lucky.
I was lucky enough to have friends who had computers, and I spent a lot of time in the computers labs at school as well.
Yeah. So I like the approach that you had about, you got the computers, at your house, and besides playing games, you actually wanted to go deeper into what does this thing do? How can I create programs? That's actually a great mindset for anybody in cybersecurity, is to have that curiosity of what else can this do? It'll take you very far. I'm trying to take that approach with threat hunting and automation. What else can be done on an automated scale, or, how else can I approach this without doing manual work all the time? So I think
automate all the things
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's a really good mentality to have with cybersecurity. Is what else can I do with whatever product that you're using?
Right, and I mean, and I think a lot of the approaches that what I learned is that when you're consulting is that you're selling a lot of product, but you actually don't understand how it works. And I think it's so important for professionals that decide to go into the field that if you're punting a product, you understand how it works. You got to learn how to build these things and how it operates. Because I mean, at some point in time, somebody who's doing offensive security on the nefarious side of things is going to find a weakness or a hole. So at some point I do want to build my own product, but I mean, you've got to understand how products are built in order to do that.
I'm going through that. It's hard. I'm building like this application for like my company, and it's like it's kind of cool, but it's also like there's a lot of things I just didn't know. Like I never went through the process of actually developing a product, and it's like all these small hurdles like you just don't think about from like the architectural side to just like different levels of functionality. Like it's really difficult when you're building from scratch. I'll put it that way.
And the psychological aspect of it as well is that you're constantly having this imposter syndrome, thinking that, well, my product is so, inferior compared to these other commercial products. It's really difficult to build something in the space and have to deal with the psychological aspect of it as well.
Yes, I 100% agree. Now I'm at the point I don't even look at the competitors anymore. I know what I'm building, but at one point I was like, have they made any updates to their product? Have they added this new feature? Like, is there something I need to be worried about? And then I was pretty much placing myself in this negative, projecting this negativity on myself. So I was like, oh, your stuff isn't all that great. What you're building may not sell. And it's like, okay, just don't pay attention to anyone else. Like, just get it built, and we'll hammer out the rest once it's built.
Yeah, that's all you can do, man. Because I mean, somebody's going to need your product, right? So even when somebody writes a book, a lot of people probably have that negative approach as well. I'm currently writing a book for cybersecurity, and I'm trying to keep away any negative thoughts about what I'm writing about in regards to protecting your online finances. Sure, it's been done a lot of times, but not from my perspective. So you have to kind of keep that in mind too. That whatever you're building or writing, look at it from who's going to actually listen to my perspective and who can I help. And a lot of times you're going to help somebody.
You hit the nail on the head, and every great product started out as an idea. It just really evolved into this great, fully polished product. Even Metasploit started out, using Perl. Now they're using Ruby, and that's a whole framework. There's a whole bunch of these products out there that, it started off just being a simple Python script, and now end up being these huge, massive products, that service hundreds of Fortune 5 companies around the world.
Yep.
And then you're operating inside of, in security, is there anyone that you kind of look to for guidance, or someone that who are your influence currently in the space?
Sure. So currently in the space would definitely be the atTari, which is Tavis Ormandy and the Google Project Zero team. Mostly because the kind of stuff that they're coming up is next level. Also like the bit of silent war that they have against antivirus. I think it's pretty funny. So I'm always waiting to see what the next thing that they come out with. I think just the approach that they have to security is next level. I really, really look up to them from a technical perspective. Back in the day when I was starting, there weren't a lot of people that you could really look up to. It's not that they were in the news. There was nothing like Twitter or Facebook or anything, or LinkedIn, or any of these sort of common platforms that you could share knowledge. So you had IRC, Internet Relay Chat, back in the day. And that was the only communication that you had with these people, and all they had was handles. So you never knew what their name was. But there were some channels that I did hang on. We did write some exploits. I know there was Darknet or Nefnet was one, but there was one particular person who stood out, and his name was Rainforest Puppy. And he actually attended, I think, one of the Black Hats. I remember him, he was wearing a shiny silver shirt. He was definitely peacocking and looking for attention. But he was doing some research in something called IIS Unicode vulnerability. And based on that, I wrote my first exploit, written in Perl, and it's still on Packetstorm to this day. And he was definitely, he was definitely somebody I looked up to because he was cool, and he was doing cool stuff.
If anyone's unfamiliar with Google Project Zero, it's essentially the research arm, the cybersecurity research arm of Google, where they're finding a massive amount of vulnerabilities, not just from an OS perspective, but also from a product perspective too. They do some crazy sometimes I read their papers, the stuff Travis puts out, and I'm confused.
Yeah, he puts out some very detailed technical stuff. Yeah, for real.
You won't be the first, you won't be the last.
I was like, it's just like legit. Like I'm having to look things up. Like, but it helps. Like so, like he's just so detailed. It's kind of odd to see like a researcher that can just kind of. I mean, I'd imagine there's like a whole team helping them edit, their papers and everything. But it's like the amount of detail that they provide. It's like it makes it digestible, but it's also like I didn't think that was possible. Like there's a lot of times I read that stuff and I'm like, I wouldn't have thought that was possible, but okay.
Right, and I think it's because it is detailed so technically. A lot of these other researchers, myself included, you do a lot of this work, but you don't write it down, so you can explain it to people. But to replicate it, you need a technical white paper on it, and they do definitely do that very well.
Yeah, they do. You said something funny earlier. One of the handles is Rainforest Puppy. That's definitely late '90s, early 2000s type of handle. 100%. Rainforest Puppy, nice. So, if you could write a white paper explaining your journey into cybersecurity, what would the title of that white paper be?
I would say, hacker hustle, hustle and hacker. Reason being is that you don't start out, I don't have a university degree, I pretty much hustled my way all the way to where I am today. And I think it's because of that constant love for what I'm doing, and having to make up for that lack of a degree, so to speak. So I've got to sit there with my peers who do have masters and doctorates in computer science, etc., and be able to keep up with the conversation. And which just means I had to work a lot harder and I had to hustle a lot harder. So that was pretty much what I would call it.
Okay. I was going to ask you that, because I know, there's a mixture of people that don't have degrees or they have degrees or have certs, only have certs. What's your take on certifications?
This might not come across well to a number of people. I'm not huge on certifications. Reason being is that, they're good. I think, for somebody getting into the industry, it's a good foothold to understand concepts. It really is. But what I tend to find these days is that there's a lot of people who are collecting certifications, and you usually find them because you see when you get the email signature and it's just the whole alphabet times 10, and I tend to shy away from that. How can you be really good at what you want to do in cybersecurity if you don't specialize? I understand there are people who are really good at everything, but you can't really be good at something if you're just collecting certs all the time. You're literally doing that as a career. You're collecting certifications, and so I tend to shy away from people like that. But I think it is a good indication, and I appreciate that you do that, because then I can see, all right, I know what you're doing and what you're not doing. But I don't put a lot of priority on certifications unless it's to a specific speciality in the field.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, because I know a lot of times on social media you'll see a person saying, "Oh, I'm going after my OSCP, I'm going after my CEH, whatever." And what else are you doing besides trying to go after certification? Are you researching? Are you staying up late at night to understand the technicality of what you're trying to get into? I know for me, I was kind of like that at one point in time, trying to get all these certifications. But as I actually accepted my role as the blue teamer, I actually found myself more doing research on my own and actually becoming better, because I'm actually doing my own research. I'm talking to different peers, really trying to understand, the 1,000 different ways that an attacker could attack an organization. And it's actually, been beneficial for me to take that approach.
Yeah, right. I think when I've hired, I don't, I've hired, I've run teams and hired, and I don't focus on the cert part. It's more the one thing you hear me say a lot when I'm interviewing, I'm like, what area do you feel like you're strongest in? And you feel free to go as deep as possible there. And I just listen to them speak. And from listening to someone speak, especially when you give them the freedom just to go deep. If you want to think about malware for Windows boxes, you want to dive into DLL and threat processing and lateral movements and how that's conducted, go as deep as you can. And I can kind of tell where you are. And I think I would say what I've seen from individuals that are very passionate about the field, nothing against search, but the individuals that are passionate about the field, their language is different because it's based on their own interpretation versus kind of individuals that but have learned a decent amount from search, which is fine, but the cert language is the same across the board because the material is likely the same until they update it. So you can kind of tell when someone is kind of just pushing back or regurgitating what they learned from that specific certification. because the language across like 4 or 5 people, especially when you're interviewing, like I challenge you to try this when you're interviewing, like listen to what they're saying, and you can tell who's taking like a cert or whatnot, because their the verbiage that they use is like dang near similar, you know, when they start speaking about specific topics, because that's what they learned during the certification aspect of it, versus that person who's kind of just taking it on their own and is beginning like upskilling or just banging away at night learning more.
I cannot agree with you more. I mean, I conducted, I think, close to 100 interviews over the last 2 years, and you hit the nail on the head. The terminology that they use is across the board when it comes from certification. But then when you ask them, what would you do in certain scenarios and instances, and then it's that technical know-how or lack of technical know-how that differentiates between certificate knowledge and experience. Or not even that, but like going home and, there's a lot of things you're not going to learn from a certification, which is the stuff that we do late at night, in terms of research and building things and writing things. And I think that's the kind of caveat or discrepancy is that a lot of the people who are in the field don't have the time to go and do certifications. Although the flip side to that is that people are trying to get into the space. Some of the requirements are for these companies to have these certifications. But yeah, you're right, 100%. I mean, you can almost immediately identify which certificate that somebody's done based on the conversation.
Yeah, totally.
I agree. And just to recap Gus's approach, he did offensive security for nearly 20 years, and now he's trying to get into defensive, and that's a really good approach. He's learned his craft, he's trying to master something, and now he's trying to master something else, and that's actually a really good approach.
Yeah,
I definitely have not mastered. I'm still very much the student, but I do feel it is comfortable enough to move into the blue teaming space.
There you go. That's a better word here, comfortable.
Yeah.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, I know we got to wrap it up, but I definitely wanted to thank you, Gus, for joining us on IDS, or Inclusion Diversity System.
Yeah, thank you so much,
appreciate it, man, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, big shout out to Gus. That was actually a lot of fun. I think we have one more guest from South Africa coming up soon too. And I think we should. She's pretty awesome also.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I learned a lot from him, especially in the IoT space. It's one space you don't hear about too often, especially in the States. But that's still a very good aspect to look at when it comes to security.
Most def. Well, I think it's about time. Time for that time, man.
Yeah, man. Thank everybody for listening. Check us out on social media on Twitter, IDS_podcast. You can follow me at cybergent_101 on Twitter. And we will be having a YouTube channel here shortly, so we're pretty excited about that. It should be under Intrusion and Diversity System, or IDS.
Yeah, it's at IDS, and then we'll be from now on we'll be uploading our videos there. So those growing pains are getting a little easier. So now we're learning,
Yeah, we're still in our infancy. Bear with us, we'll get there. But we appreciate everybody listening and supporting, and we're learning on the fly and getting things better. So thank you all for your time, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions, of course, ping us on Twitter at IDS Podcast, or you can find me on Twitter at Sir Mudblood. Really, I might have to change my name. I'm beginning to think people might not think I'm professional. But yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for all your support. Have a good night.